Welcome to Post Games, a podcast about why and how we love video games. My name is Chris Plant. I'm so glad to have you here. Practically everybody knows the story of Atari at its height. For the end of the 70s and the beginning of the 80s, Atari was synonymous with the medium, the video game equivalent of Band-Aid, Kleenex, and Coke. Fewer people, and if I'm honest, probably the kind who listen to this podcast, know of Atari's crash and the video game crash of 1983. And fewer people still, the real sickos, know what came after that. The doomed console, the corporate mergers, acquisitions, sales, and bankruptcy, and, more recently, the blockchain. Yes, the blockchain. For most of its life, Atari has been paradoxically one of gaming's most iconic brands, appearing in film and television and on t-shirts at Target. And it's also been one of its oldest punchlines, which is why I am so fascinated by the latest version of Atari, the first take on Atari in my lifetime with an exciting vision. And listener, I am nearly 40. Atari, under relatively new CEO Wade Rosen, is inserting a syringe into the Atari of the past, drawing the magic from decades ago and injecting it into a new Atari. And that corpse, it's alive. This week on Post Games, the life, death, and rebirth of Atari. Atari CEO Wade Rosen joins me to discuss gaming's ship of Theseus. To begin, a Patreon bonus prologue, a history of Atari and its lost decades. Act 1, why Atari can't die, an extended conversation with Atari CEO Wade Rosen. Act 2, Rosen sticks around to tell us what is a modern Atari game. And, of course, Act 3, the news of the week, which may or may not just be me recommending anime to you. You will get all of that and more right after the break. Today's guest is Atari CEO Wade Rosen. Rosen first joined Atari in 2020 as chair of the board of directors. In April 2021, following the previous CEO's departure to focus on the blockchain business, Rosen took over as Atari CEO. Rosen is a self-described gamer, and though I'm reluctant to see any C-suite maneuvers as altruistic, his early moves have showed, at minimum, an understanding of what the gaming community broadly likes and what it despises. One of Rosen's first moves was to pull the company away from free-to-play and gambling, unwinding work on free-to-play games and the Atari Casino. Since then, Rosen has been on something of a buying spree. In the past 4 years, Atari has invested in the retro game streaming brand AntStream and outright acquired gaming's version of IMDb, Moby Games. It also picked up, and sometimes reacquired, beloved retro IP associated with the Atari brand, like Berserk and Frenzy, along with dozens, if not hundreds of other minor retro IP. It acquired retro port studio, Night Dive, and later Digital Eclipse, which has spent the last decade producing, honestly, quite excellent remaster collections, from the Mega Man Legacy Collection in 2015 to the upcoming Mortal Kombat Legacy Collection. If you listened to the episode on the Nintendo Switch 2 launch, and you remember the guest Chris Kohler, he currently works at Digital Eclipse. Atari has also shipped new hardware that plays new and classic Atari games. Atari today is a modern game company with a focus on retro games. For me, this philosophy, this strategy, can be seen in two projects. One, Atari 50, a massive and ongoing retro games collection / documentary created by Digital Eclipse, which serves as a sort of digital museum for half a century of Atari games. And there's this month's Missile Command Delta, developed in partnership with 13AM Games and Mighty Yell. Critics have been generally pleased, which, I know, sounds like faint praise until you remember the year is 2025, and we're talking about a fucking reboot of Missile Command. How did Rosen make Atari relevant after 50 years? And just how much bigger can it get? Let's get into it. It is a new year and you want to eat better, but you still have no time to work with. You have no energy. You have so much going on in your life. Oh, what do? You do Factor. 2 minutes, real food, and you are done. You're not failing at eating healthy. You're failing at having 3 extra hours in every night. You're failing at not being a chef and wanting to do cleanup. Factor takes care of that. It has delicious food that is good for you. You got lean proteins, colorful veggies, whole food ingredients, and none of the yucky stuff, no refined sugars, no artificial sweeteners. It will offer you whatever you need to match your lifestyle. For me, Mediterranean diet, it really works well. But maybe you need something else, like a high-protein diet or GLP-1 support or ready-to-eat salads. Whatever it is, Factor wants to meet you on your page. Always fresh, never frozen, and like I said, ready in 2 minutes with no prep, no cleanup. Just chill. I use Factor. I think that you should too. Head to factormeals.com/postgames, 50 off, and use code postgames50 off to get 50% off your first Factor box, plus free breakfast for a year. Offer only valid for new Factor customers with code and qualifying auto-renewing subscriptions purchase. Make healthier eating easy with Factor. What is your video game origin story? How the hell did you get here?
My video game origin story, well, I am actually in my hometown. As you can see, there's a lake behind me, which is rare. I don't get to be here often. But this little town is in the middle of nowhere and hours from any city. And she grew up in a rural part of this community. So video games were not even a means of escape. It was like books and games and movies were this portal to other places. And they were a huge additive to my life. They gave back a lot. And I think they really spurned a lot of creativity. And I put myself in France before ever going to France. Like I always think of Final Fantasy Tactics, and the first time I saw that and was just blown away. And then years later, when I finally went to France in the French countryside, I was like, oh, that's Final Fantasy Tactics. That's what this is modeled after. It's rural France. It's like provincial France. And so for me, I've just always loved games. I've loved games. They've been a passion. It's carried with me through every phase of my life. But I wasn't in games. In fact, I intentionally avoided games because I was worried that going into something that I cared so much about might ruin that thing. And so my career before this was more traditional tech, banking even. And finally, I got to the end of the company that I had started and had the opportunity to really ask myself what I was going to do next. And I decided to take a leap and go into something that I was actually passionate about for once and that I really cared deeply about. And, I was spending all this time reading about games in addition to playing games. And I thought, you know what, let's try it. I'll be very careful not to destroy this love and this passion that I have. And that led me to start my first game company, which is Ziggurat Interactive, which still exists and still does really cool work in the retro space. But through that, I was connected with Atari and then eventually came and became the CEO of Atari. And we really did what Ziggurat was trying to do, but on a much larger scale here.
This is interesting to me that you talk about not wanting to get into games early on because you don't want to destroy the love that you have for them. And you are, and we're going to talk very honestly about Atari, or at least I am. I think you will too.
I will be as candid as I can. And when I can, I will be very upfront about if I can't reveal information.
It is a brand that it can't be destroyed. You can't lose the love for it. I've never seen a brand like it.
People have tried.
Well, that's what I mean. It's incredible. People have tried to turn it into a hotel company. Like, it has been everything, and yet it survives. So if you're going to partner yourself with a gaming brand where you don't have to worry about it dying, congrats, you found it.
Thank you.
But I am curious, now that you are in the driver's seat here, what is Atari's reputation in 2025? And that's kind of a multi-pronged question, I should say, because I know you have retro gamers, you have people who dabble in games, you have people totally outside of games.
Yeah.
So go with that as you may.
There's a lot of smaller buckets, but the two main buckets I would say is, Atari's perception in pop culture, which is still pretty beloved, right? People might not, in a general pop cultural sense, be aware of what Atari is doing today, but it's certainly a brand that people are aware of. They're aware of Pong or Centipede or Asteroids, and just wear an Atari t-shirt around or a hat, and the amount of people that will comment on it and have fond feelings. So I would say in the general population, it's one of nostalgia and fondness and love, maybe a curiosity around what the company's been about or what it's been doing for 40 years. Because for a lot of the general population, the history of Atari stops in 1984, 1983, right? Around the video game crash. And so that love is built up from there. Now, then there's the video game sector, and I think that's different. So the perception of Atari in video games, people that are more connected to video games is probably more nuanced. There certainly have been ups and downs. A lot of people who are in games know that there was this period of time afterwards with the Lynx and the Jaguar, and that while not as fondly remembered as, say, the OG Atari, is also kind of viewed in a halcyon light nowadays. And you just mentioned the Jaguar before this, and Bubsy and all these, so there's still a fondness there. There's the days when Infogrames rebranded as Atari, and that is a little bit more mixed, but there still is like a lot of cool things that happened then and it was done at that point in time. I would say after that, a lot of mixed sentiment in the market from Atari for a long time, and in the video game industry specifically. Yeah. And to your point, I think people were unsure of what it stood for and what it was really focused on and what it was trying to do. And I think I've been at this job for about 4 years now, and that was one of the first things that I realized when coming into this was, hey, we need to pick something. We've got to be great at something. It doesn't have to be huge or this massive thing, but we've got to pick something that we can be, like, genuinely aspire to be the best in the world at that thing. And that's how we really moved into retro games. So I hope over the last 4 years or so that the video game industry sees us in a different light and has started to reevaluate what Atari means in the industry and for the industry, and can see it for what it's doing today.
So let's dig into all of that then, because you said people maybe didn't even understand what Atari stood for. I imagine they also didn't even understand what Atari was. It had gone through so many different sales or variations. The name got thrown around, all these different things. And when I look at what you have been tasked with doing, or tasked yourself with doing, it's like getting the band back together. It is rebuilding, I guess, the original Atari after it has gone its different ways. So I want to talk about each of that. In another interview, you had talked about licensing, hardware, and games as these kind of three pillars.
Yeah.
And I assume that those are still your three pillars for the company.
Yeah, those are the core three. Yep.
So let's go through them. Let's start with licensing, because I think that's the thing that everyone recognizes Atari for. People can't see it right now, but you're wearing a very sick Atari t-shirt.
Thank you.
I am jealous of. Atari has gone
sold on Atari.com. I got to give that plug. And
don't worry, we're going to be talking a lot about that. We're going to get to it. But before that, Atari has gone through, as I said, these owners, bankruptcies, debacles, and yet the brand remains iconic. You can wear that shirt. Yeah, again, and yes, in the small town that you're from, and people know what it means, and they still have fond feelings for it.
Totally.
What makes it so stable?
I mean, people forget, Atari, when it was growing, it was actually the fastest company to ever reach $2 billion in revenue. So back in the day, the fastest company in U.S. corporate history, I believe. There was a really dynamic aspect about it. I mean, it was all these aspirational Silicon Valley things that now we are jaded on, and we see the other side of those things. But at the time, like, show up however you want, like work when you want, come into the office when you want. It was a counterculture brand back before being counterculture was a cliche thing, you know?
Yeah.
So now, like, now if somebody were to say that, you'd be like, oh, you know, you'd groan, but then it actually meant something. And I think that was very real. It wasn't faked. It wasn't like a mask that somebody was trying to wear. That permeated the entire culture, and people felt that, and they could resonate with how genuine that was. And I think when people see it, that's still what they resonate with. Also, the brand, this is one of the things that I didn't fully appreciate until I got into Atari. When I say timeless, that goes in both directions. It can easily work for like a retro video game. If you see that, and you're like, oh yeah, I associate that with Atari. But if you see something futuristic, if it's on the side of a building in Blade Runner, that also works and feels right. And so there's something about it, the name, the sound, the logo itself, that like lives in all these camps in a way that I'm not sure I've ever been around a brand that does. Maybe a few, Nike in its prime, but that I think is part of its timelessness. How big and dominant it was at one time, how genuine it was in what it was doing, and then also just setting itself up with these really great roots and imagery that continues to resonate today.
So you mentioned the clothing. We have to talk about all the merch. Last fall, Atari announced a line of Atari sauces. We had Super Breakout Jalapeno Hot Sauce. We had Crystal Castle's Enchanted Berry Barbecue Sauce. You have not just clothing and apparel, you have a summer line that is now on your website. You partnered with coffee blends. There's a Roller Coaster Tycoon scented candle. I'm going to link all of these in the podcast notes because I'm sure people are going to be looking for them. But what are the feelings or vibes that your partners are trying to siphon when they agree to these deals?
Oftentimes today with licensing, there is a heavy nostalgic aspect to that, right? I mean, we live in a time that's very complex. It's very uncertain. It can feel very heavy. And so when you think back on those times, there's a simplicity to it. And I think that is oftentimes one of the main things that they're trying to capture. I think just to go back to a time where we can like enjoy something and be very present with it, and maybe not have to go in 100 directions with it. Even gaming itself, I use Atari as an example. Like when I was a kid, the games that are made today are the games I asked for when I was a kid. The problem is that oftentimes I don't have the bit time or bandwidth or the life to play them, right? Like Elden Ring was the game I wanted when I was 14. Man, if Elden Ring would have come out when I was 14, it would have seriously damaged my social life. Like that game is so perfect in so many ways. And at the same time, the last thing I need is another to-do list in my phone of things, because I already have that in my day-to-day life. My life was simpler, and I think in some ways the world was, and so we wanted more complex things, and I think the world is much more complex now, and so we oftentimes yearn for simpler things. And then that timelessness as well. So there's the My Play Watch on the site as well, that's a new licensing product, but one we were pretty closely involved with. There's something just very like timeless, and even though it's a digital watch and it's Atari, it still makes sense. And so I think that's usually what the licensors are going for: simplicity, timelessness, and recognizability and fun.
I will say that they would probably say that the watch is timeful, not timeless.
You're right.
We're here all night.
I'm not going to top that today, Chris. Okay.
You definitely are. Well, I have you in a good mood, and we all agree that we're going to be honest. What is the strangest licensing deal that has come across your desk? This doesn't have to be something that you actually agreed to.
Oh, man. Well, I mean, here's the irony. So the hotels, which you mentioned, is probably the strangest, but I'm actually quite fond of the hotels, and I think the hotels will be successful, right? I don't have anything new to share on the hotels here and turns out hotels take a really long time to build. That was something that preceded me, that licensing arrangement. But, you know, the team that's working on that they're really a dedicated team. And you know, they sold me on their vision too, because I came in, I was like, what is this about hotels? What am I looking at? And then I sat down, I talked with them, and I could, you know, see what they were hoping to build. And it's like, that actually could be a really cool experience. So who knows whether, you know, time will tell whether that does end up being a success or not. But I'd say hotels are probably about as wild as it gets, because people love to reference it, and rightfully so. But they're also, it is also one of those that I'm glad we take those risks because, yeah, it might fail, but it also might succeed. What other brand in the world with the notoriety and the reach of Atari is going to take a risk like that? There's not many.
Yeah. One last licensing question. At last year's Gamescom, you said the Pong is the second most licensed brand after Atari itself.
Correct.
And that you don't make new Pong games. You actually, I had made the Pong RPG a few years ago,
Pong
but
Quest,
it doesn't seem like...
Yeah, I kind of...
Yes.
Yeah.
But
on sale right now, I think.
Do you intentionally hold off on making games for a certain IP because you want to protect the image or the licensing or that timelessness?
No, I don't. I wouldn't say we hold off on it. I think the problem with Pong, or it's not a problem with Pong, like I want to make a new Pong game, just I don't want to force it. We got really close on a new Pong title when I first got here, and I still think that would have been a pretty big success, and that would have been a great title. It was the right fit. It just made sense. It was an extension, and I think that's the challenge with Pong is it's such a recognizable IP, but that doesn't necessarily mean that people want to play it. So how do you make it attractive? How do you make it really fun and enjoyable? You're probably going to have to push the boundaries and the limits and do something really unexpected and creative beyond just making it a 4-player Pong game or having multi-balls, whatever a natural sequel to Pong would be. There was a time for that, but I think that time has passed. So if we do a new Pong game, I really hope we can come up with something pretty wild and creative with it.
Yeah, I'm going to hang a lantern on a thing that you just said, which is a recognizable IP, but do people want to play it? Because I think that's going to be kind of a recurring theme here and like what it means to buy something. But let's go to the hardware. So Atari right now, and I don't know if most people know this who are not hardcore gamers, is selling multiple consoles that it actively supports. There are 3, and correct me if I'm wrong here, recreations of classic consoles, the 400, 2600, 7800. And then there's still the VCS, so it seems like that is maybe not as big of a priority. And these aren't necessarily novelty devices. They sell for over $100. So I'm curious if you could just tell me a little bit of what is the business? Who are the people who are actively buying these things?
Like speaking of hardware more holistically, the 2600 plus and the 7800 plus, while they are the form factors of those respective consoles, there's rough parity between that functionality. So the 2600 plus also plays 7800 games. 7800 plus also plays 2600 games. One comes packaged with the traditional joystick controller. One comes packaged with the European gamepad controller. Only Europe got a gamepad 7800 controller. That was really loved, and so we packaged that, a wireless one. Even though it looks like there's 2, it's really like a single ecosystem there, and we call that the Plus ecosystem. Any of the games that we're releasing today can be played on all of those peripherals, things like that. And those games and peripherals can be played on classic consoles too. It's both compatible with the new hardware and the old hardware. The 400, that is technically a license with Retro Games Limited, but we work closely with them. That's one of those licenses that's almost akin to a partnership, and we work on marketing. It feels very much like Atari, but it's not one that we actively have to support. And then the VCS, which predated me, that was something that I stepped into, is still, a console that we support in the operating system. We're still updating that, but that's mostly community driven at this point. A lot of the content that's coming out for that is community based. I would say the Plus ecosystem is the one that we put the most emphasis on and continue to release the most content around.
What's the demographics? Like, who are these people?
For the 2600, 7800 Plus, it's probably mostly Atari fans, people who played Atari when they were young. But around holidays, we get a lot of people buying these for their parents. I would say, the prime Atari demographic is old millennials to like young boomers, and then all of Gen X, right? So if it's Gen X, like that's definitely our sweet spot target demographic. But it can stretch. Atari 50 did so well and got so much traction that there's quite a few young players who now care about Atari, have purchased Atari hardware because of the Atari 50 compilation, what they learned from that, and just their love of it.
So there's a thing that you said earlier that, again, I think some people will not know, which is that you you don't call this a dead system. You call this a living system.
Oh, yeah.
New games are being made for it. Can you tell people how that works?
Yeah. So I play all kinds I play modern games, but I also play a lot of retro games. I'm just really enjoy games in general. So one day I might be playing my Polymega, the next day an analog, next day the PS5 Pro. It doesn't. I just go back and forth and I float between a lot of these. And I think for me, it was always a shame because there's still new games being made for Game Boy Advance or the Genesis or the Super Nintendo and for the 2600 and for the 7800 and for the Atari line of computers. It's kind of arbitrary that we call them dead systems because they're not dead. They're still supported. There's still all of this community support and there's still all of these great games being made for them. Oftentimes some of the best games are made after the official end of a console life cycle. And I thought that was crazy. One of the things that we really wanted to give back to the community was just treating these consoles as they are, which are living, constantly evolving ecosystems, and trying to build more tools to enable the community to do that, trying to elevate some of the best works in the community. In some cases, like you said, we actually do active development for some of these games. Digital Eclipse, they did a great 2600 game years ago. And when I first met with them, that was one of the first things we talked about was just, they're like, oh, could we do some 2600 development at some point? I'm like, yeah, definitely. They even built some stuff in Atari 50 in a 2600 environment. That's a big, I think, difference for us at Atari. Even though it is older hardware, new things are constantly being learned. The boundaries are still being pushed. And restricting the playing field that somebody can design in, oftentimes you end up with really incredible creativity. I think that's something that lots of mediums, not just video games, use all the time to push the bounds of creativity is through restriction. You can actually find sometimes much more innovative and interesting things. And again, age of complexity, ever more complex games, ever bigger, longer. Those are great, but that's sometimes not what you want. And so our theory is we're not trying to compete with those games. This is an entirely different niche in the market that people still care about.
I want to go deeper into the software itself.
Yeah.
You do sell these new games. You sell Atari cartridges like Bounty Bob Strikes Back. I'm curious if you have any research on what happens once somebody buys it. And by that I mean, is it like vinyl where you expect some portion of the audience to buy it as art almost and display it? Or do you think most people will actually use it for its purpose and are putting it into machines?
It's a great question. And I wonder myself what that demographic is. I mean, I've certainly bought video games and not opened them for the collectability aspect. I've also bought a lot of games and opened them. I like to think it's probably 50-50. I don't know. It's so interesting with, we're on a lot of the main consoles, who knows how much longer we're going to have physical media, right? And so this collectability aspect of video games has always existed. It'll probably, and it won't go away, but it'll probably take on it'll probably look different in the future and have different permutations. But as far as for Atari, I think it's about 50-50, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
What is amazing is we were hoping that as we release more titles, people would continue to be interested. They wouldn't just buy their console once. But the attach rate and the people coming back and buying games, that has been at a significantly higher rate than we had hoped for, which is ultimately, that's the end goal, that you're producing and creating things that are captivating enough that people want to come back and continue to buy more cartridges. I like to think they're playing all of them and like enjoying that and get integrated even deeper into Atari. But if they're throwing it up on the wall and it's living there and that's bringing them joy, then that's okay too.
Yeah. Well, let's dig into the games and the actual playing them because, as you said, games is the focus of your tenure. Like really bringing it back. But as you also said earlier, you can have a lot of IPs, but do people always want to play all of them? My personal opinion. Most classic Atari games are not fun to the average person in 2025. And I'll caveat that by saying most games are not fun maybe even still. There's a lot of bad stuff released on Steam, right? But there's a difference. And you even said in an interview with MinMax last year, you said, playing Asteroids is fun, but understanding what went into all of it is sometimes a lot more enjoyable. So I'm curious, you do have these brands that have this name recognition, that do have this history. How do you recharge this IP effectively to make it less dull, to make it something people care about now?
Yeah. It's a constant challenge. You use the recharge thing, which appreciate the tee up on that. So we obviously we do have the recharge line, which when I got there, that was the first thing we did. It seemed like the lowest hanging fruit. And those are modern remakes of the original games, oftentimes with synthwave colors and graphics and power-ups and a little bit more approachability. There's a lot of debate online which ones are the best. I think the Centipede one is amazing. Black Widow plays really well. The Yars one is super innovative. But they're still small games in comparison to, what a modern large-scale production would be. And so, beyond that, we take shots. We take some risks and we take challenges. Some work, some don't. But I think oftentimes you're trying to find the fun in that initial game, which is like, hey, what's in here that's really enjoyable? And we can extract that and then move it into a space that's going to be more approachable, that people are going to be more drawn to, adding things that might also make it more captivating for them, which could include narrative. It could include graphical updates. It doesn't have to, though. I mean, Geometry Wars is probably the best example of a more modern take on Asteroids. And you play it and you're like, oh, this is so fun. Like, I still play Geometry Wars. It's just great. We look at those things and we really try to decide, like, what was at the core that made it successful? And then can we bring that out in a modern way that's going to resonate with people today? And sometimes that is successful and sometimes it's not. But those are also the risks that we have to take. I think being the stewards of the brand, we balance those, but we are still willing to take a risk on the IP and to see what sticks.
I mean, 50 years going through all this, we said earlier, different pieces of it have been sold to different people, or it's just been a different thing. One of the challenges that I see you facing from the outside is getting this band back together, collecting the old IP. And I'm curious if you could tell me a little bit about the scope of that problem and what you've done about getting different aspects of Atari under one roof.
Well, I think what's tricky is what's the band, right? Is it Atari up to 1983? Is it Atari up to 1995? Is it Atari, up to 2014? There's these different eras of Atari. I think the purchase of a lot of the GT Interactive, Infogrames IP, bringing that back in. You mentioned Bubsy earlier. That was one of the IPs that we bought back from that classic Accolade IP. It just made sense. It made sense with what we were doing. I don't think we would have done it to get the band back together, but it fit with the business model. It fit with like what we were trying to do in that space. Sometimes it's about bringing the band back, but also sometimes it's about looking around and saying, okay, what other IPs do people associate with us? And if we have those, does that increase what we can do? For years, people probably thought we had made Berserk, given the prevalence of the 2600 card. But the reality was we didn't. That was Stern Electronics back in the day. So acquiring the Berserk IP, that allowed us to then, wrap that up and talk about that story, integrate it into our games for licensing or do a new recharge version. So we can kind of reach back into whatever period of time we want and find things that we want to work on and bring that back. There's not many companies with that level and that long and that much history. And so it's given us a lot of runway to really go into and explore and bring back.
You talked about who are you bringing back and choosing who are the members of the band, if you're following that metaphor. But some of the stuff that we've talked about here is not necessarily great. It's maybe important. But it's hard to find words for things like Bubsy. So this is the Bubsy section. As you take a drink, I don't know if that is whiskey or not. For younger people who are listening to this, can you say what is Bubsy and why do people care about Bubsy?
Well, I mean, Bubsy is interesting. There's constant surprises in this business. And some of them are tough ones that you got to roll with, and some of them are pleasant surprises. So of all the acquisitions or all pretty much anything I've done since I got back, including the acquisition of Night Dive or of Digital Eclipse or Berserk and Frenzy or really anything else, Bubsy got more national coverage than anything. I mean, he was on Good Morning America for like 2 minutes. And if you would have asked me if I thought anything like that was going to happen, I would have said, no, that's just like, I thought that would have gone completely under the radar. Maybe the Intellivision acquisition was probably the only thing that came close in terms of being talked about on like a national stage. So Bubsy is a polarizing game because not all the games are bad. I will say the first one, you know, it has its fans, and I think it is a little bit better than people give it credit for. It's pretty tough. The second one is less fondly remembered, and the third is a very early 3D game that some would consider one of the worst games of all time. Now, that is not true. I don't.
Sure.
But it is I mean, the fact that it's considered that is definitely true. Do I think it's the worst game of all time? No. I played Bubsy 3D. I bought a copy. I'm like, I have to play this. I have to try it. I would not say it is a great game, but it is. I don't even know if it makes my top 5. Like, I'm not sure, but it's rough. It's pretty rough around the edges.
Maybe the top 5 and not top 10 is the most telling thing I've ever heard someone say. I'm not sure if it's in the top 3. What about the top 5? I said the top 3.
I said I didn't say top 10, but I mean, it just reminds me of so many early PS1 platformers. Like, there's this game I was very excited about as a kid called Blasto. Do you remember?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Of course.
Like, I played it. I'm like, this feels just like Blasto, which is not a compliment, but it's also like, I know some people putting Blasto on that list. So I think it's a game that people love to hate on, but there is also a timelessness to Bubsy. And despite the fact that thing, I mean, it really does, like, Bubsy has 9 lives. And, you know, I think, you know, from my standpoint, how cool would it be to be the company, to be the iteration that finally made a great Bubsy game? Like, I would love to see that happen at some point in time in my tenure here, that we're the ones that make a great Bubsy game. There'd be joy in that.
Yeah, well, and it feels appropriate, and I hope that this is received as intended. But talk about another thing that it can't be stopped. It can't be belittled, and it will retain love, really, despite any sound logic.
Maybe because it has so much of that. It's so infamous. Maybe that's why people love it. But, you know, the other advantage of that is the bar is not that high. Like, if you're going to bring back Sly Cooper or something like that, I mean, pretty high bar. One of these beloved platformers, okay. But, you know, people who played it, it might not even be as good as people remember, but they remember in their mind is pretty high. Bubsy, that bar is not that high, but yet everybody knows about it. And it's kind of this industry-wide joke. So if you can actually do something great, not only clear that bar, but make something awesome, I think I think we have to try at some point. We have to try.
Here's where this loops back to that question about vinyl and what the people do with these things that they buy. And it's especially strange for how much is digital sales. But who is buying this? Because what you just described, and I'll repeat a little bit of it back to you, was a trilogy in which the first game was, I think, okay, is what you said.
Yeah, I think it's good. It was considered good when it came out. And, like,
yes.
You know, so maybe it's aged a little roughly, but it's still a pretty good game. Yeah.
Good to okay to one of the most disrespected games of all time. And I've seen this collection. The amount of love and attention that has gone into this collection, you would think it's the Mona Lisa. I mean, this it's not getting the treatment to that random painting, I think it was in Spain, where the old woman turned it into like a monstrous religious painting. I don't know if you ever saw that. But like, no, it is truly a compassionate pixel by pixel recreation. So who is that for? Is that for people who love Bubsy? Is that for kind of pranky gifts? Is it people who have never even played Bubsy but have familiarity with it as a fun punchline? What is it?
I think that's the beauty of something like Bubsy. It's all of the above, right? Like, obviously, if you're a Bubsy fan, you're number one on the list. Sort of like Atari 50. Like, we knew the Atari fans would go for it. And the benefit with Atari 50 is it is a great game, right? So we knew we would get the Atari fans. But then the question was, okay, who else can we get in? And if we bring them in, how do we make them into a fan? And I think that's why an IP like Bubsy is special, is because even if you're not a fan, if you're in the games industry, you might have enough tangential knowledge that if it pops up, you'll read it a little bit more closely than you would another game that you've never heard of. And even that little bit of extra attention, that little bit of your eye moving towards it imperceptibly, like that is an advantage in a really mature industry like this, where we're all fighting for attention and eyeballs, and with mature distribution channels. Having a brand that people are at least going to like stop and read about, that gives you a chance to hopefully turn them into a fan. Hopefully they take that plunge. You'll get the Bubsy fans, which is probably enough, but then it has the chance to be something bigger. And I think that's why we like it, right? When we do something with Bubsy, we know it's going to be successful, but you still have the opportunity to have it be a big success. And there's not many of those. Oftentimes games, you're either swinging for the fences or you're striking out. And so with Bubsy, yeah, I think there's just a wide demographic that could actually be interested in it.
Will the collection need to be a smash hit to get a green light for a new one?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. The words of a true fan in power. That's fantastic.
No, I mean, and the reason I say that is because that's just not really how we listen. We'll take a smash hit whenever we can get it. We're not turning that down. But we try to operate this company. One of the other major changes of Atari is we're not trying to swing for the fences every time. I just used the analogy, but I'll reuse it. Like we really were trying to hit, staying on the baseball analogies, like singles and doubles. Hey, let's put out a great game. Let's have it be successful. Let's take our learnings and move on. And if we fail, that's okay too. But let's not take on a project that's so large that if we fail, we're in an existential crisis. Let's try some things. And regardless of whether they succeed or fail, we're going to get better. We're going to learn. We're going to do things a little bit differently next time. And we just have more wins than losses at the end of the day. And we're okay. And that I think is the antithesis of video games. When mobile games, I don't know, what is it, 8 out of the 10 are, if you were to go back to 2015, like 8 out of the top 10 games are still in the top 10. Like the success criteria is binary in a lot of games. We're trying to find ways where that's not the case. And I think that's why we've been able to carve out a pretty good niche and continue to grow in what is essentially at best a flat market. Even if Bubsy's a limited success or a small success, that's not going to preclude it from having a new title. We don't need it to sell millions of units in order to guarantee that it keeps going on.
Yeah. One final question for you. The Atari brand, whether we like it or not, will be around in 10 years.
I hope people like it.
I think they do, and I think it feels like you are building it towards it. I'm just recognizing a fact. Yeah. It will not die. I could have said 100 years.
It's going to outlive me. Like, for sure. Yes, so definitely.
10 years from now, what does it look like? What is I'm not even going to say like best case scenario. Realistically, what do you see this company looking like in 10 years?
Ooh, 10 years. We're still at that phase where we're kind of taking it year by year, and 3 years feels pretty far out for us. But if I look out 10 years, I would love to have Atari back in a place where it is part of the larger video game conversation. And maybe even to a point where pop culture, it's not just fondness and nostalgia and love that people feel for it, but there's also a relevancy to it in pop culture, and that people know what we're doing, and they see us out in the world. And I think that starts in video games, and I think that primarily comes through video games, and that means having a relevancy in games that we probably haven't had for a long time. So yeah, I would love to see it move back into a place where it is one of those talked about companies, and one of those companies that it's viewed as a top and relevant video game company.
I mean, I'm just saying, and I don't want to, give business tips, but ray tracing Bubsy, I mean, you put those words together. Digital Foundry already has the video up.
Maybe that's what's going to get us there, Chris. Maybe ray tracing Bubsy is going to get us there.
I'll make sure to send you the contract.
That would make my job a lot easier. I just ride the ray tracing Bubsy train all the way. That done. done. I
just imagine a bridge and it is missing the middle and the train is going right into the ocean. But it's a happy thought. Thank you so much for making the time to chat.
Yeah, anytime. This is great. I love it.
Act 3, the news of the week. It is a slow week in the video game world, with few big name releases for players to collectively gab about. And the industry itself, I think, is still licking its wounds following Microsoft's layoffs of an estimated 9,000 people. So, one quick positive bit of game news, and then a surprise. Friends, the SAG-AFTRA video game voice actors strike is officially over and a contract has been signed. If you missed my episode with the very special guest, Sarah Elmale, the union had been striking for over a year for meaningful AI protections. At the time of that conversation, a tentative agreement had been reached between game studios and the union, but members still had to vote to ratify the contract. And that is done. And so is the strike. Now everybody can get back to doing what they love, and I love to see it. Speaking of doing what they love, have you heard the good word of anime? Yes, that is right. The summer season has officially begun, and there is something for everyone, not just the perverts. Though, I'll be real, the perverts are doing just fine. One of my favorite ongoing series, My Dress-Up Darling, returns. A teen boy with a talent for sewing and makeup befriends a teen girl who loves to cosplay. What could go wrong? Want less fan service? Understandable. Don Da Don Season 2 is available on Netflix. A teenage dorky boy dedicated to space aliens and an impossibly cool teenage girl with a connection to Ghost join forces to fight the occult. If you don't want to be starting at a second season, you can find other stuff too. On Netflix, Leviathan is about a world on the edge of war in an alternate history 1910s. What really matters here is it has new music by Joe Hisaishi, who orchestrates all of the incredible scores for Studio Ghibli movies. And you've got Night of the Living Cat, which is about a virus that turns people into cats. Even if you find anime cringe or weird, you're telling me you don't want to watch a zombie apocalypse show in which the zombies are adorable cats and they spread their contagion by nuzzling the legs of unwitting humans? I mean, come on. Come on. Anyways, that's the news of the week. And that is a wrap on Atari. I just checked its pulse, and I'm happy to report it's still alive. Next week, on Post Games, how to make a video game funny, and how to make something funny from a video game. Tactical Breach Wizards director and writer Tom Francis teaches me the serious art of making silly games, plus author, ex-Nintendo localizer, late-night comedy writer, and brilliant stand-up comedian Mike Drucker joins me to talk about the opposite. How do you make video games into comedy? But for now, I begin my farewell. A reminder, Post Games supporters get the show and the newsletter early on Fridays at 5 p.m. Eastern. They get extra acts and bonus materials. This week, Patreon listeners got an extended history of Atari's forgotten decades. And each month, Patreon supporters get a video in my ongoing series, Video Game Journalism 101. The second episode went live on Monday. It's about ethics in games journalism. You love to be relevant. Plus, no ads on anything. Subscribe to the Patreon at patreon.com/postgames. Subscribe to the newsletter for free at post.games. Post Games logo by James Barham, theme by Mark Sparling, and a special thank you to this week's guest, Wade Rosen. And very last thing, as I like to say, if you like the show, please consider sharing it with a friend or leaving a review. We are still in those early days, and I am absolutely determined to make this show my full-time focus for years to come. But that only happens with your help. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next week.
The main thing that we learned from Atari 50, which we carried forward into a lot of other projects, is we use it on this call, but it's about candor. Like, can you have a really candid conversation with the audience around the creation of these things? I mean, did you have a chance to play Atari 50 much, Chris? Yeah. So I think probably the most iconic moment is the Todd Fry one, where I think David created Todd Fry, like just the way it's juxtaposed about David Crane's like, no, I don't know what they're talking about. People weren't doing drugs in the office. And then you just cut to Todd Fry and he's like, we were smoking up every day.
You will hear stories of hot tubs in the lobby and drug use in the office. And I'm here to tell you that none of that happened in my department.
We started smoking pot right in our office. Rob and I were like the premier pot. Sorry, Rob. I and some other person who occasionally shared an office with me for 5 years at Atari, however that freaking worked, we would just fire up right in the office. It's like, who knows why? It's like, it's illegal. It's like, it wasn't even a sense of privilege. It was just mindlessness.